It's the World Soccer Talk podcast, the only podcast that focuses on watching soccer on TV, online and apps. In episode 101, we discuss an interview with Univision to discuss their Champions League and Liga MX coverage. Fox prepares to dumb down their coverage of soccer with Saturday's MLS Cup final. Telemundo picks up the rights to Sunday's River-Boca game, and we have a bunch of letters from you listeners in our mailbag section. My name is Christopher Harris, aka The Gaffer, and I'm joined by my co-host Kartik Krishnaiyer. Kartik, it's an unusually cool and chilly Florida morning here on Thursday as we're recording this, and it's been in some ways a chilly week for US soccer and the US Soccer Federation with the appointment of Greg Berhalter as the new coach. What's your take on it, and what's your take on the process, and any conflict of interest?
Well, the big question mark is about the process, because we had a situation where the top American coaches, or the guys widely acknowledged as the top American coaches, Peter Vermes and Jesse Marsch, were not granted formal interviews. We had a situation where the top foreign coach in Major League Soccer, Tata Martino, was not granted a formal interview. We had a situation where the former coach of the Mexican national team, who has spent much of his professional life in the United States, including in Major League Soccer, Juan Carlos Osorio, seemed like a natural fit, was not granted an interview. Went on to coach Paraguay, took that job. So there were a lot of question marks asked about this process. I know there were people out there who had the dream of, let's get Arsene Wenger, or let's get some available sexy name like that, big time coach. Lopetegui, obviously, Grant Wall from SI reported had contacted the U.S. Soccer Federation. My understanding is that the intermediary in that situation was Raul, former great Real Madrid and Spanish national team player, that contacted the U.S. Soccer Federation on behalf of Lopetegui, and they weren't interested. But my beef is that they didn't even interview the top American candidates, the guys that I think have stood out in Major League Soccer the last few years, particularly Jesse Marsch, who's now an assistant at Red Bull Leipzig, at RB Leipzig in the Bundesliga, but spent several years managing New York Red Bulls, and before that managing Montreal. Was a very, very good player, very heady player, has a specific style attached to him, style of football. And you've seen the Red Bulls develop players very quickly. And same thing with Peter Vermes, most successful American coach in MLS the last decade, not named Bruce Arena, has a specific style of play, passing style of play associated with Sporting Kansas City. So why did this happen, Chris? Well, the speculation is because Jay Berhalter, the brother of Greg Berhalter, is the chief operating officer of U.S. Soccer, and is, based on my experiences and my reporting the last 3 years specifically, the most powerful guy in that building besides Dan Flynn, who's on his way out retiring. So a lot of questions out there. I feel bad in a way for Greg Berhalter. I think he's a decent coach. He's an American who has coached abroad. He coached in Sweden for 2.5 seasons. He is an American that spent the vast majority of his playing career in Europe, generally with in second-tier leagues like the Eredivisie, or in a second division, like he was in Bundesliga 2 for a few years. I watched him at 1860 Munich. I thought he was still pretty decent at that age, in his early to mid-30s at the time. But there's going to be a lot of pressure on him from the get-go because of, obviously, the U.S. is in a bad place, worst place the U.S. has been in 30 years in terms of its national team, but more so because of this assumption by some of nepotism, the bad appearance, the process not being transparent, and the process, quite frankly, Chris, not reaching out to some of the most logical names. Again, I know a lot of people are complaining, we could have gotten Arsene Wenger, we could have gotten Lopetegui, we could have gotten Jose Peckerman, just resigned in Colombia, we could have gotten him, we could have gotten Marcelo Lippi, whoever. I'm more focused on the fact that we didn't even interview the top domestic candidates. That to me is more galling than anything.
The laughable thing about all of this is that Carlos Cordero in the press conference this week said that they had a consideration list of, I think, 32 or 33 managers that they considered, which is fine. You and I could put together a list of 50 managers that would be should be considered for this job. But the reality is that they've interviewed one maybe 2, but they were dead set on getting Berhalter. From my perspective, I mean, Berhalter's stepping into a very difficult position. I'm going to give him, the support and go in there with an open mind and hope he does well. But it's a very difficult position in terms of the players at his disposal. It's definitely a transition phase. There aren't a lot of American stars available to him, and the ones that are stars are aging, such as Tim Howard or Michael Bradley, and they're kind of at their end of their kind of playing careers. So yeah, to me, it's going to be an interesting one to watch. My hot take on this, Kartik, is that I think that, and this just might be just me, but it looks like the USSF is almost trying to copy England and the English Football Association. When they hired Jurgen Klinsmann, that was at a time where England had gone out to get Fabio Capello, and Capello was doing pretty well, and actually was starting to turn that team around a little bit. And at the same time now, I think in some ways it's like they're looking at, say, Gareth Southgate and going like, hey, yeah, why can't we get somebody that's, kind of one of these managers that's, or one of these coaches that is not one of the big names. Let's go for somebody that knows the American system, knows the American players better, and is going to fit in with the system. That's my take on it, is that they're kind of looking to the FA for some guidance and think, yeah, why should we go for big names? Let's go for somebody that actually knows the players really, really well. But a difficult position to step into, and it's going to be an interesting one to watch. And I think the first friendly is against Panama in January, and we'll take it from there.
Copying England is the vogue thing right now in the U.S. USL, which is the system that covers the professional leagues immediately under Major League Soccer, for those that aren't familiar with it, has now rebranded all of their competitions on English lines. So their second division is called the USL Championship. Their third division is now called USL League One, and their fourth division is now called USL League Two. Which I guess it makes it very familiar for those of us who follow English football, like you and me. But I think for the average American fan, they're like, well, what is this?
Right. Yeah, same thing with the NASL. I mean, NASL a couple of years ago had the rebranded one of the championships as the championship. So it's a very familiar, but in very kind of copycat type of procedures there. So Kartik, from this past week, I didn't catch as much football as I normally do, just because of kids' soccer games in the weekends. But the standout game for me, I didn't catch it live, but I saw the highlights, and it seemed to be Arsenal against Spurs. This seemed to be one of the games of the weekend, if not one of the games of the season. Did you get a chance to catch this, or was there another game that you thought was the best one?
Well, that and the Roma Inter game, which was on ESPN2, ESPN News or ESPN. I don't know. My DVR taped it. But I thought that was actually a very good match, and it was on one of the ESPN networks. That, and then obviously the Spurs Arsenal game was very entertaining, although you have to ask questions about Spurs' capitulation in that setting. That's not something we've seen from them against Arsenal since that 5-2 match several years ago. Right? No, I'm trying to remember. There was a match where they capitulated like this, but it was certainly from an Arsenal perspective a very, very good second half to watch, and it begs a lot of questions about Mesut Ozil, who I thought had been having a pretty good season compared to his recent campaigns up until a few weeks ago. And what happens to Arsenal when Aaron Ramsey departs, which seems to be inevitable at this point, and goes to Juventus or Bayern or wherever he's headed? Because I don't know if Arsenal quite put up that display if Emery doesn't make the two very aggressive changes at halftime. One last point on this. This is not media or TV related, but and I didn't hear the point necessarily made in this way on NBC. Kyle Martino, the Robbies gave a lot of credit to Emery for making the two halftime changes. I will point out, as someone who, I'm not an Arsenal fan, but I've obviously watched a ton of Arsenal the last decade or more, or 2 decades. Arsene Wenger was very reluctant to make these sorts of changes in a match when he's only down 2-1 at halftime. Wenger's changes often would come in the 65th or 70th minute. He would wait till minute 60 to see how things were playing out, then make changes, and they would sometimes not impact the game, or he'd throw Giroud on late more recently in recent years, and he'd get an equalizer but not have time for a winner, right?
Yep.
Emery making these changes early making them at halftime, making 2 changes at halftime, rolling the dice in a derby made all the difference. So to this point, until whatever the date of that match was, December 2nd, I was reluctant to say, hey, there's a huge change in Arsenal because, one, out of respect for Wenger, and 2, knowing that Arsenal usually has some sort of mid-season swoon at some point, or they either start poorly or they have a poor December to February stretch. We've seen that time and again under Wenger with largely this group of players. But the combination of that particular in-game management and the continued brilliance of Torreira, who is a completely different sort of player than what we've seen at Arsenal in the last decade, since Gilberto Silva, if not going even further back than that, I think means that this is a different Arsenal. And I was disappointed I didn't hear that specific point made. Normally the NBC pundits are all over it, but the contrast with Wenger to me was pretty clear in the second half of this game.
And that was the thing too about Arsenal in the second half against Man United midweek too, in terms of very positive substitutions, Lacazette coming on. And really, that second half, it was Arsenal that was in the ascendancy. It looked like they were going to win it at the end. Ended up being the 2-2 tie. Just an example, though, of a game with so many defensive blunders. And actually, even just during the Spurs game too, defensive blunders. And to me, that's really the weakness of the Premier League when you see those teams competing in the Champions League, is that defensively they're poor. Even scoring wise, they're fine, but that's going to undermine the potential of any major Premier League team going through into kind of the final stages or the final of the Champions League this season. But all in all, it was Liverpool-Everton too. I mean, a good game, just a crazy ending to the match. I thought, at least from this past week, a good week for the Premier League, other than those defensive blunders, but overall, very entertaining and lots of goals. Now, Kartik, you caught this, and I missed it because I've been bouncing around watching different games, watching the Bundesliga, watching Championship, and then I saw a couple of clips of this. But talk to me and talk to the listeners about Sky Sports and now the synergy with NBC Sports and what you've seen so far and what's your take on it.
Yeah, I've seen more Sky post-match interviews, but now this weekend, prior to this weekend, and I'll admit I was in a bit of a rotten mood after the Origi goal, although credit to Origi for running out that play. Just a terrible mistake by Pickford that we certainly hope he doesn't make again. I mean, England keepers set to make those sorts of errors. So it's just continuing a long line of that sort of thing. But so I was in kind of a rotten mood after that match. But Gary Neville joined Rebecca Lowe. You have access to the whole kind of Sky database of interviews and clips, and even some analysis from Sky pundits now being worked into NBC's pre-game and post-match coverage because of the Comcast takeover of Sky in the UK. I'm trying to remember which match it was. Maybe it was Gary Neville. Holding an NBC mic.
It was the Arsenal Spurs match, the post-match.
Arsenal Spurs match, yeah. Holding an NBC mic, which we have not seen before. So that is something that Fox never really took full advantage of when they had the Premier League rights and they had the access to Sky. They would bring Jeff Shreves on. Actually, they would bring Jeff Shreves on for their own coverage of Champions League because Sky didn't have that. But they didn't really use the Sky, the assets Sky have for their Premier League coverage. And I think this is also good for those of you in the UK, because I've heard a lot of people in the business in the UK rave about NBC's coverage and say, well, we wish we had some of that here. I tend to be, and I think you're the same way, Chris, you and I tend to say, hey, we wish we had some Sky's coverage and BT's coverage here in the States. BT's out of this equation, but I mentioned them because they do some good things as well. I think what we're going to see is more synergies. We're going to see more of that Sky-type coverage on NBC and more of that NBC-type coverage on Sky, and I think for that, everyone wins. Really exciting, and want to see how much more this is rolled out in the coming weeks. They haven't made an announcement about it or anything, but you just notice it in the coverage.
It'll be interesting to see where they go with this, though, too, Kartik, because in some ways they want to kind of keep that NBC brand. and kind of still showcase the talent that they've always had. But this is a great way to accentuate, to enhance the coverage that they already have. I mean, it's already the gold standard for soccer coverage in the US, and having some opportunities to bring in, say Gary Neville or Jamie Carragher or some of the other Sky Sports presenters and pundits definitely will help. But it'll be interesting to see how much of that they do. I mean, this is a great opportunities. I mean, Monday Night Football, which is the dominance, the number one analysis soccer show in English language speaking the world, really, in terms of the high level of analysis. Will we see clips of that, bits and pieces of that, maybe on the Monday? That would be fantastic to see. And we know that the head of NBC Sports, in terms of the soccer production, last season went out to Sky Sports and spent some time with them, sat in on their Monday Night Football set on Sky Sports to kind of see how they did things. So, and vice versa, like you said too, Kartik, I mean, the analysis by NBC Sports and the coverage that they do, that could actually help Sky Sports too, because Sky Sports isn't perfect by any means. I mean, some of their coverage is pretty poor, but most of it is good when it comes to the Premier League. But yeah, interesting times there to see how that develops, and certainly one that I think would encourage myself and probably a lot of other listeners to tune in maybe a little bit earlier for some of these games and to kind of keep on watching the post-match, because you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know who they're going to pull in, and I'm looking forward to it.
One quick question about the coverage on NBC this week. I didn't hear any, and I'll admit I was at the office watching the end of this match, but any coverage of Lacazette punches the ball out of David De Gea's arms and scores a goal, and it's obviously called back. But if he didn't foul De Gea and he used his foot, what was the call? Because I didn't hear any analysis. I taped the NBC post-match show and didn't hear any analysis of that. Did they talk about that in game? Because I'm curious about that rule and maybe why it wasn't talked about.
Yeah, good question. To be honest with you, I'm not sure, because actually, as I was doing the call, as I was watching the game, I got a phone call from Sports Illustrated to do an interview, and then post-match, I think I had a run to pick up my kids from school or something like that. So that's the thing. I missed it. So I'd be surprised if they mentioned it or covered it. Just because there's so much, especially on Wednesday, there was so many, 6 games, and probably most of the coverage post-match was focused on. Well,
post-match they didn't cover it. They didn't.
Okay, so during the game, I'm not sure, because I had it on mute for a little bit at the time while I took the call.
It was a bizarre sequence. I don't know if you saw it, but what happened is De Gea, he didn't put the ball down, but he held the ball out and was clearly not paying attention. Lacazette just punched it out with his foot and put it in the back of the net. And I think this might have been in stoppage time or around the 90th minute.
Yeah, I remember seeing it, because I was on the phone. I remember seeing it and going like, "Oh my gosh, what's happening?" But then I didn't hear the commentary or the analysis to see what their take was on that.
Because my take is that a keeper should not always be protected. I mean, if a keeper is not paying attention and Lacazette didn't, use his body to push De Gea to drop the ball, but in fact just kind of used his foot. I don't know what's wrong with that, but whatever. Yeah,
we've seen that before too, where there's been a defender or an attacker behind the goalkeeper, kind of by the goalpost, and the goalkeeper doesn't know. He's getting ready to to punt the ball out. Yeah. And doesn't realize there's an actual player behind him, and the player runs up, sneaks around the corner, and knocks the ball away and scores. I can't remember which game it was, but it was several years ago. But yeah, that one's always. It was
Fernando Torres against Sunderland. I remember.
See, I knew you would know, Kartik.
And I think the keeper was Mignolet, if I'm not mistaken.
Probably.
He ended up going to Liverpool. Maybe it was another keeper, but it was definitely Fernando Torres. I remember. It
might have been that goalkeeper that was. The Manchester City keeper that went to City. The tall bloke from was he from Romania or? No?
Who passed away now from Hungary? Martin Fulop.
Maybe.
Yeah, it might have been him.
All right, Kartik, so anything else that stood out before we move on from this past week? Anything else worth mentioning?
Yeah, I just thought the coverage of the MLS playoffs was decent from Fox in the Atlanta match, and then ESPN did a good job of capturing the rowdy behavior from the fans in Kansas City and some of the issues there with Adrian Healy and Taylor Twellman and Seb Salazar covering that match, Kansas City, Portland. So I thought that was pretty good. And then I think we also saw a ton of ads for DAZN again this weekend, whether it was on NBC's Premier League coverage, where they're sponsoring part of the they're sponsoring the Scorebug at times. I saw it on a lot of college football coverage and college basketball coverage over the weekend. We saw it on TNT last week. I saw it on CNN. The one place I have not seen it is ESPN or ABC. So it seems like you could read into that what you want about John Skipper, but I think it seems like every other possible place they could pick up recognition and pick up potential subscribers, DAZN is advertising. Whether any other sporting property on any network that's not owned by Disney. And that's pretty. It is very aggressive.
It's a great commercial too. Although for our audience, there's very little interest. I mean, if you're into boxing or if you're into MMA or UFC, whichever one they also have. I think maybe MMA. Maybe if you're into those sports, yeah. I mean, it's a 30-day trial. This looks great. But if you're a soccer fan, I think they have the J League, and I think they have one of the other Asian leagues too. So for us, for the vast majority, for the 99.9% of soccer fans, other than the ones that are interested in boxing, there's no interest. But at least they're putting themselves on the map. At least they're putting themselves in terms of people knowing the name, knowing how to pronounce it, knowing what it is, and getting ready for the next tidal wave, which, as we spoke about a few weeks ago, we know that they're aggressively trying to get some soccer TV rights from these other companies and say, hey, let's take this off your hands. We'll pay you a large amount of money to just get the rights to have those on our streaming platform. So we shall have to wait and see on that one, Kartik. All right, Kartik, let's move on to TV streaming news.
Yeah, so Fox is taking a pass on this weekend's historic Boca River-Boca, right? It's technically the River home leg. River-Boca second leg of the Copa Libertadores, which will be played at the Bernabeu. Telemundo will broadcast it instead, which I think is probably good news for most of the U.S. audience in terms of its accessibility.
Well, this one's confusing though, Kartik, because actually what it is that Telemundo announced that they were going to cover Sunday's game. I followed up to find out, okay, is this exclusive rights? And they said no. So what's happening is actually Fox Deportes will still carry the game, but Telemundo's carrying it too, which is bizarre because usually if you're a Spanish language broadcaster, you have the full rights to that game. You want to make sure that you're the go-to place for it. So both Fox Deportes and Telemundo, as well as Fanatis, and I think Fox Soccer Match Pass will all have the game in Spanish. Also, NBCSports.com will have the game too, a live broadcast of the game in Spanish. So it's all Spanish all the time and nothing available in English. We know that Fox Sports has the rights to the game in English, but for whatever reason, they're deciding not to broadcast it, which is very bizarre.
Yeah, and obviously they're going to split they're going to have some of their team in Madrid, some of their team at Telemundo's HQ in Miami. I think they'll probably knock it out of the park for the coverage of this match. There is still a lot of controversy. I work and talk amongst Argentine football fans all the time. There is still a lot of controversy about this match. And I think just a sense of disappointment that this is what it's come to. But the match is going to happen. South America, CONMEBOL has to send someone to the Club World Cup, so enjoy it. It should be a great display of football in spite of all the problems we've had. It has been, Chris, I should point out, a month since the first leg, or almost a month. It will be a month at the time of the match. Yeah,
it's been crazy. And that's the thing, too. I think Telemundo has the rights to the FIFA Club World Cup. So from Telemundo's perspective, having this game on their network, and bragging about, okay, whoever wins this game, you can watch them play on Telemundo. I think that's a smart move in terms of just getting people ready for that tournament and making sure everyone knows that you can watch it on Telemundo.
And given Real Madrid's struggles, this is a real opportunity for Boca or River to win the Club World Cup.
Yeah, it's going to be entertaining, that's for sure. So something we predicted a few weeks ago, talking about the whole Girona-Barcelona game and whether it was going to be played in January in the United States, and we predicted that it was probably going to go to the courts, or probably going to go to lawsuits. And we can report now that La Liga has filed a lawsuit against the Spanish Federation over the match. The Spanish League has taken legal action against the country's football federation in an effort to get approval for a regular season match in the US, reports ESPN. A Madrid commercial court said last Thursday the league filed a lawsuit accusing the Spanish Football Federation of unfair competition. The court said a decision is expected in 2 weeks, in time for the planned January match between Barcelona and Girona in Miami. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with this one, Kartik. Even if La Liga wins this case, that doesn't mean the games are going to be played, but it moves it to the next stage probably trying to get approvals from, UEFA, CONCACAF, USSF. Still a long list, and many obstacles to get past. But this is the first one. It'll be interesting to see what happens here.
Yeah, and obviously things have to happen pretty quickly for this to take place, or at least this match. Moving on, Sling TV has integrated beIN Sports Connect into the app, which I think is great news for all Sling TV users, and gives you the access to many more broadcasts, many more games than you just get naturally with having beIN and beIN in Espanol.
And the way that this works is that, so if you are a Sling Orange or Sling Blue customer, a subscriber, you just have to subscribe to either the Best of Spanish TV package or the Sling International package, also known as World Sports, or you can subscribe to Sling Latino. So there's a bunch of different ways, but by one of those options, you can then get access to beIN Sports Connect, which is integrated directly into the app, and you can watch a ton of more La Liga games, Liga 1 games, Turkish Super League, etc. So good news there for Sling TV subscribers. Moving on, Qatar says that the World Cup games in 2022, the times that they could kick off, so this hasn't been approved yet, but the kickoff times, if approved, on a day during the World Cup when there's 4 games on a day, the times would be proposed 5 a.m. Eastern time. All these times are Eastern. So 5 a.m., 8 a.m., 11 a.m., and 2 p.m. And for those days where there's 3 games on a day rather than 4, it would be 8, 11 a.m., and then 2 p.m. Eastern. Kartik, that's some rough going for the West Coast. Some rough going again for Fox Sports in terms of trying to get some TV ratings. A lot of it depends on the US men's national team. But again, these games are during office hours. This is going to be a really difficult World Cup to generate some big numbers.
Yeah, although, again, it's only an hour earlier than Russia. So we had a day with 4 games in Russia. Australia, France kicked off at 6 a.m. Eastern time. That was in the first weekend of the competition. So this would just be an hour earlier. 9 a.m. was typically, there were kickoffs then, so this would be an hour earlier. So it's going to be rough going, and perhaps this is the justification FIFA gives for rolling over Fox and Telemundo for another cycle when we press them on that, right? When we press the issue of why was there a no-bid contract for 2026, essentially. And the start times were not ideal for the U.S. audience. I guess the real justification has been moving this to the winter, but the start times also not ideal for Fox or Telemundo. Yeah,
November and December. So it's going to be some rough going, I think, overall. Kartik, just a couple more news items to go.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk about this the last 48 hours. Fox Sports has introduced corner flag cams for Saturday's MLS Cup final between Atlanta and Portland, which is on in primetime on Big Fox. This is, quite frankly, something I never thought of, and it's not something that I think necessarily soccer fans want to see. I don't know. Maybe you do. Let us know. It came as quite a shock to me. This is just more kind of Americanization or over broadcastization of a football match.
It's just to me, it's a gimmick. It's just a way of what can we, if Fox goes to their production team or their tech team and says, okay, what can we do to kind of up the level, to get something newsworthy, do something different? I know, let's do a corner flag cam, which I don't. To me, like I don't think anyone has ever said like, "Hey, I wish there was a cam right by the corner flag so we can see what's happening near the corner flag." To me, it's just, I mean, in the past, ESPN has done the goal cams, which that makes more sense in terms of seeing where the ball's dropping. I mean, that's where the action is. Corner flags, not so much. But, to me, it's just a gimmick. I
think one of the things that I think we don't get on TV that you get live at a football match, and maybe this is something that's going to come up in our listener mailbag because of my desire to see a lot of local football in person, is what happens off the ball and the kind of player movement that I think a lot of times isn't picked up on TV, and people who just watch soccer on television don't appreciate the movement and the ability to find space certain players have because it's not always on the television camera. Now, if you have additional cams and cameras that pick that up, which pick up a guy who's a deep-lying midfielder, his run into the area when he's behind the action and the ball is in the final third, I'd love to see a camera that picks that up. But no one has invented that. That's very difficult to do. It's difficult to splice into the coverage. So they come up with these gimmicks, which I think are rather useless, honestly.
Yeah, and to me, I mean, it's... I mean, a lot of these games will have anywhere from, like, say, 20 to 25 cameras anyway. So if there's an off-the-field incident, something happens, which we've seen in Premier League matches or La Liga matches. I mean, kind of, you'll go back to the replay and then off camera, or even NBC has gone back and kind of analyzed the tapes to try and find out exactly what happened, and you'll see some different angles. That to me is beneficial, but that's beneficial from a point of view of having a camera in the stadium rather than just having a cam by a corner flag that's probably going to be practically useless. And I'm sure Fox is going to play that up during the game. We're like, hey, look at this. Isn't this great? What can we see? And it's really going to evolve into nothing. But all right, Kartik, one last item before we move on to the next segment, and that is that both NBC Sports and Turner Sports are investing in the game and sending the crews out into the field. And the first up is NBC on Saturday. They're taking their Premier League morning show to Manhattan this Saturday for the NYC Fan Fest 2018. So they'll have all of their talent broadcasting from New York, from Manhattan, to fans across the United States. And then next week, we've got Stu Holden and Steve Nash heading to Barcelona to call the Barcelona Spurs game on Tuesday. So they're going to do pre-match, post-match, as well as halftime and commentary from Camp Nou in Barcelona. So that'll be great to watch. And I think on Wednesday too, they're going to have some. They're not going to be commentating the games, but they will have some on-site analysis and feedback. So it's good to see that these guys are investing and sending the crews out to Europe. It's a good sign. Now, Kartik, let's move on to TV ratings. We don't have all of the numbers in yet, but we will have them soon at worldsoccertalk.com. And quite a few numbers to look at. Kartik, anything here that jumps out at you as notable?
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed that Southampton Man United was only 863,000. Maybe it was because it was going up against college football championship games, and Southampton is not very good, although that might change with their managerial appointment. Hasenhüttl is a very good manager from what I watched at Leipzig the last few years, but he can only do so much with the players he has, maybe. But that was only 863,000, and I thought that was a broadcast now that the bulk of college football is over, and you only have those championship games, which don't interest everybody. Going up against a Man United game, we might get closer to 1 million, but we did it. And then the MLS Cup playoffs, again, underwhelming numbers. I was disappointed by it, but we'll see what happens on Big Fox this weekend. I think it'll be poised for a big number between Fox and Univision, maybe upwards of 2 million. Let's see, 1.5 million, something like that. But the numbers weren't particularly good for anything. One standout for me was that given how early the match started, I thought that the Arsenal Spurs number at close to 500,000 on NBCSN was pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and some of the Champions League numbers too that came out from last week, and that was the Spurs against Inter game on TNT on the Wednesday, and that was 215,000 people tuning into that. And then the day before on the Tuesday was AS Roma against Real Madrid. That one had 198,000 viewers on TNT. And the Univision numbers we'll have in this report on worldsoccertalk.com in the next 24 hours. Next up, we have an interview with the president of Univision Deportes, which is Juan Carlos Rodriguez. Out of all of the soccer-related networks in the United States, Univision is the one that has the most number of fans tuning in to watch games week in, week out, thanks to their coverage of Liga MX. But in the past 12 months, they've expanded their coverage to include the Champions League, Europa League, Bundesliga, and UEFA Nations League, among others. I had the chance to speak with Juan Carlos this week to learn more about their expansion into European soccer and to get his take on the Liga MX Apertura semi-finals that are set to bring in huge TV ratings this week. All right, Juan Carlos, so let's dive right in. And let me first ask you, what are your thoughts so far on how the UEFA Champions League has been doing on Univision Deportes?
So first of all, thank you for inviting us to your podcast. I think we have done a pretty good job. There's still a lot of things to do. We're getting into the 8th game week, and this is the first stage. Then we'll go to the knockout stage. So far, so good. We've been lucky enough to have the first 8 most rated first leg games ever in the history of UEFA. So we are very proud of that. On the other hand, we still have to do a lot of work on the promotional side to keep bringing UEFA champions to our market. But we're very enthusiastic.
So how much of a difference is it making to Univision by having a brand new time window for soccer on Univision and a lot of the Univision channels during a mid-afternoon on Wednesday, when typically in the past there wasn't any soccer coverage at that time?
We've been lucky enough to bring new viewers that regularly do not watch our regular ongoing Univision part. On the other hand, on the sports side, we have been able to complement what we were missing, and that was the main purpose of bringing European Cups here, is to have a build-up of our foundation of an everyday rating. So by having UEFA and Europa and all of the Euros, we're building every day a stronger and more robust proposal for our prime time every day. So we're very happy about it.
Do you have a sense that it's actually bringing in, say, soccer fans into really kind of bringing new clubs into their landscape, for lack of a better expression? But for soccer fans who have grown up, maybe the Club America fans, maybe the Chivas fans, and now all of a sudden in Spanish language, weekdays, you got Barcelona, Real Madrid, Liverpool, PSG, AEK Athens. There's so many teams and so many different stories. Do you think in a way it's actually helping those clubs grow in popularity in the United States by introducing these teams to an audience that may not have, Real Madrid and Barcelona, yes, but may not have watched as much of European soccer in the past?
So I think it's a whole ecosystem. The ecosystem brings new viewers to our networks. It also brings more appealing teams as a proposal to the viewers. On the other hand, it also brings not only Spanish speakers to our broadcasts, but we're also having a lot of Anglos coming because of the proposal that we're making. So I think it's a smart ecosystem that is working. We're as of today, we're very proud of it.
Have you had any pushback from the viewers who would watch the normal programming that would be on weekday afternoons on Univision, kind of the over-the-air channel, that an hour kind of soccer is being played at that time instead of whatever programming they were watching in the past?
Yes, and it would be fair to say that our friends from entertainment have done an incredible job partnering with us. The good news from a business perspective is that from a CPM perspective and from a holistic approach, we're bringing new clients and new money that were not in our networks. So the answer is yes, we have had some pushback, and we're trying to find smarter ways of programming every day. As you know, media and broadcasters, we're being challenged every day, and this is part of a new piece to the puzzle. But our friends from entertainment and news have been very helpful.
Now, next week, TNT, Turner Sports, is sending, I think, two announcers, Stu Holden and Steve Nash, to call the game from Barcelona. Are there any plans to send Univision talent to Europe in the future to call games from the stadiums for the UEFA Champions League?
Yes, we have forecasted that the final legs, semi-finals and finals, will be broadcasted from stadiums at site, and we will produce all-week programming those 2 weeks, so that we can cover in depth from site. So okay. The answer is yes.
Excellent. Now, TNT has gone for a model of trying to push as many people to BR Live as possible and showing as few games as possible on television. Univision, on the other side, has taken the opposite approach, where your business model seems to be more so focused on the linear, the television, broadcasting as many games as possible through your array of different channels, and then also, of course, having all the games available through digital too. Which which business model do you feel is the better monetization model?
I would say both are very good. Short-term hours, it's more monetizable, even though we have a huge amount of coverage on the digital side. Due to the specific weight of the main networks, it doesn't feel like, but on a digital basis, we cover everything there is on UEFA. On the VR model, I think it's a very smart model for them because they are testing the markets with a new sport for them. So I think that both of the proposals are being smart, and it only changes depending on what the company is aiming for, whether it's long-term or short-term. But they're both very smart.
So do you have any anecdotes or any research to show that maybe there's been a lot of English language soccer fans who have tried to tune into, for example, Liverpool against PSG, couldn't find it, and are now watching the games on Univision, which is, the games are a lot more accessible there through television. And any stories or any kind of research to show that if you've been able to attract some of the English language audience to your Spanish language games?
We have clear data that shows that our Anglo viewers have grown in a big way. Hasn't gone past the 10%, but we are in an incredible growth area over there because accessibility is part of the name of the game. So that's what it's been helping us. So we are way more accessible at this time than we are. So as you said, we're getting more Anglo viewers every day, every game. Mm-hmm.
Now, Juan Carlos, I know you're a huge soccer fan, but has the Champions League in any way opened the eyes of people within your company or for advertisers or sponsors to the kind of potential of broadcasting more European soccer in Spanish, whether it's club soccer or whether it's international soccer such as UEFA Nations League, etc.? Is there a possibility in the future that Univision might be more interested in trying to acquire European soccer rights for Spanish language?
So I'll tell you the genesis of this, and I'll tell you the outcome so far of this. The genesis is we needed relevant programming in midweeks during daytime. That's how we came to buy these properties. We also acquired Nations League, the European Nations League, all qualifiers on the Euro. So we have a very robust proposal until the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. So on that end, we will be fully covered on European soccer. From a business perspective, yes, there's an incredible appeal to these teams and to these national teams. So new advertisers, and there has been a lot of, I would say, internal whispering on how good this has gone, because for us it was like a statement of the love of soccer that we all have as the ultimate home of soccer to America. But internally people were hesitating whether this would work or not. And it has proven that it worked, so we're very happy both internally and externally.
That's great news. One more question about the Champions League before we move on to talking about Liga MX is that has there been, in many ways, I mean, the Champions League brings in an audience that then you can actually go ahead and try to promote or your coverage of Liga MX. and vice versa. For the fans that are watching Liga MX, you can be promoting some of the Champions League games coming up in the future. Have you seen that kind of cross-pollination working in terms of trying to basically can make soccer fans who kind of maybe are stuck in maybe they just like Liga MX and that's it, to trying to attract them to Champions League, and vice versa, the other way around?
Yes, and it's been very interesting. However, it's too soon in the process because we believe, and we cannot prove it, that everybody has two teams, their national team and a local team. And then when it turns into a big soccer fan, they all love European, or we all love one or two European teams. So what's happening is that for a guy who is normally a big fan of the Mexican national team and of Chivas, finding out that he could see Chicharito, or he could see, I don't know, Real Madrid, or they could see an Italian team, in which all the time they're talking about hiring Mexicans, it starts creating a socialization mood that we haven't had in the past. So it's been very, very exciting. The results are not there yet, even though the trend is going there. Once we start with the knockout stages in the early next year, we'll see the numbers incredibly grow, and we'll be talking about this, you and I, in the next, I would say, 6 months after the final game of the Champions League, because we honestly believe that the growth is going to be there.
Right, and we've seen that too, just even during the last 12 months, as far as Univision's TV ratings and viewing figures. Just the whole Spanish language side of soccer seems to be booming. It seems to be great ratings. There's a lot of people tuning in to watch games. On the English language side, it's difficult because a lot of it's kind of led by the U.S. men's national team, and if the U.S. men's national team isn't doing as well, sometimes that fans get kind of disillusioned and may not be into soccer as much in the past, but. Yeah, definitely, without a doubt, it seems to be that Spanish language soccer TV ratings in particular, and just the industry, seems to be on an upward rise. Would you agree with that?
Well, with the ability to host in 2026 the World Cup, I think this is like the last long-term call for soccer to grow. We've been hearing for the last 40 years that soccer was going to be the next thing in sports. Now I strongly believe that the planets are aligning to become the next sport in the U.S. I believe that it's going to overpass in fan base hockey. It's going to seriously go against baseball, and hopefully by 2026, soccer will be the second or third sport in the U.S. on a very serious basis. The MLS has done an incredible job. U.S. soccer is now getting all its stuff together and getting ready to roll. Liga MX has helped. All other leagues are now able to be seen in the U.S. I don't know if you're aware, but there are 27 networks that broadcast soccer in the U.S.
Wow.
So it's the most fragmented, but also has the most amount of games there are in the industry. So there are many things that are aligning. And I believe that's going to incredibly help the growth of the sport.
Absolutely, 100%. Now, looking ahead to the Liga MX Apertura semifinals, we've got Club America against Pumas and Cruz Azul versus Monterrey. What can fans expect from these matchups?
So, for the first time in many, many years, we have three out of the four most famous teams in Mexico playing semifinals, with Monterrey being a very followed team as well. So I believe that the viewership is going to be huge. The expectation is huge between the rivalries between America, Cruz Azul, and Pumas. They're all from the same city, Mexico City. So there is all the ingredients to make it a very appealing semifinals. So viewership is going to be over the roof, I believe.
Now, many of our listeners love watching soccer from around the world, whether it's from Europe, North America, I mean, you name it, they watch it from around the world. But some of them may not have watched Liga MX yet, or haven't given it a chance yet. But with these semifinals coming up, and of course the final too, what for you are some of the major reasons why English language listeners should give these games a chance and watch them on Univision Deportes?
So first and foremost, it is prime time. So if you don't want to be caught in something that is like the same all the time in entertainment, and if you love soccer, this is played on primetime live. So that's a big appeal. Number two, I think the league itself is, in my head, it's ranked between the 6th and the 10th league, most relevant league in the world. So when you add the combination of primetime and high-quality soccer, this could definitely be an opportunity. And in our case, we have invested tons of money on the on-air experience from a technology perspective and on our talent to make it as appealing and colorful to welcome everyone. So we would love to have new viewers that come and experience a very appealing proposition that we have set up in place.
And two final questions, Juan Carlos. First question is the impact of Chivas. I mean, Chivas definitely not doing as well on the field and, of course, have a large fan base in the United States. How much of an impact that has? But then the second part of that question is in regards to the talent that Univision Deportes has and some of the names and commentators and announcers and studio talent that we can expect to see in this Liga MX Apertura semifinals and final coming up in the next week or so.
So as an American fan, I don't like Chivas. I have to start by saying that. So I'm biased on this answer.
Sure.
on the Chivas, from the business perspective, yes, Chivas is by far, with America, one of the two most relevant teams and most famous teams. So we miss them. From a business perspective, we would love to have them on the final stages. That would have been an incredible opportunity to see the most famous teams playing for the first time, I believe, in 20-something years. So we definitely miss Chivas, number one. Number two, from a talent basis, we're going to go with our finest lineup from El Perro Bermúdez and Luis Omar to Diego with the new addition of Marc Rosas, Ivan Zamorano, Hristo Stoichkov. We're going with all of our premier team to do all this next, I would say, 5 games. Yes, 5 games, because we'll have 3 out of the 4 games of the semifinal and hopefully the final legs of the tournament.
And then the last question is, do you have any thoughts about who you want to see in the final?
Yes, I want to see America winning. I would love to see it playing versus Cruz Azul, which is a big rival. And if they too get to the finals, it's going to be one of the best finals we have had in many, many years. If Pumas gets to the final, it's going to be also a very good national ambience finals. Hopefully Cruz Azul and America will end up in the final games.
Excellent. All right. Well, we're looking forward to watching those games on Univision Deportes. And Juan Carlos, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. You taking time to speak to our listeners and to give an update on both the UEFA Champions League, as well as, of course, Liga MX and all of the other soccer properties that Univision has. So thank you for everything. Appreciate it.
As I told you before, it is a pleasure to talk with you, and thank you for following us and amplifying our message, because I forgot to say that you're also one of the good guys that are helping to grow the sport in the U.S. So we collectively are going to end up helping the growth of the sport. So thank you for that.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Juan Carlos. Now, moving on, Kartik, to listener mailbag. First up is JP. JP says, Kartik has a very rigid view of what it means to be a fan of a club. The fact is, the majority of US fans in any sport only follow their club through television and social media rather than actually going to the games live. Is someone living in the New York, New Jersey area who hasn't gone to a Giants game in 5 years still allowed to call themselves a true supporter under Kartik's criteria? I'll grant him that overseas fans of a club don't share the same connection as those who live in the local area, but in these days, they probably follow just as closely as most of these locals, save for the minority who attend more than one match a year or two. With that said, I also disagree with the practice of having games played in other countries, whether it be La Liga, NFL, NBA, NHL, etc. Any takes on that, Kartik?
Yeah, I actually tend to agree with him. I think part of my issue is that we have a lot of fans in this country that don't know that there are local soccer options in their market, and they only know that there's local soccer. They call themselves big soccer fans, but they don't check out the local matches if it's not MLS, right? If it's MLS, they're aware there's a team. So let's take Atlanta. Obviously, Atlanta United has done brilliant things. They've got 70,000 people coming to these games, but they have had lots of local soccer in the Atlanta area for years, and professional soccer. They've had a professional soccer team with the exception of a couple of gaps here and there going back to the mid-'90s. And some good players have come through there, some players that you might be familiar with, or people, our listeners might be familiar with. But there's never been, there are so many people who say, oh, well, we just got professional soccer now. So they are only aspiring to a certain level of soccer, which means if they were in England and they were plopped in Gillingham or Gillingham, or they were put in Bury, they would not support those clubs, right? They would support someone else. If they're in Bury, they would say, "Hey, I'm a Man City fan or a Man United fan," even though they have their own local club. Although those obviously Bury's in Greater Manchester, but just using that as an example. So that's what I was trying to get at. Is I think that there are a lot of people in this country that don't know that there are local soccer options, and they call themselves soccer fans, and they might even gravitate to local soccer once MLS arrives, but they don't do so beforehand.
Yeah, this is a topic that I had lots of thoughts on after we did the podcast, just all weekend kind of thinking about it and thinking about it some more, because it is a big topic and it's a very important topic, and I'm glad we covered it in last week's episode and we had the feedback from the listeners, and we got some more for this episode too. To me, Kartik, it's a little bit of a thing in the US too, where if somebody opposes MLS as a system in terms of a closed league system, and then says, okay, you know what, I'm just going to support a local club, there's a lot of jeopardy with that. And I think back to myself. I mean, I was first a Swansea City fan when I grew up in Wales and have been ever since. But when I moved to the States, I became a Strikers fan. And I was watching the Strikers through the ASL, the APSL. Eventually, they went out of business. They went defunct, kind of in that stage of the club. Then I became a Miami Fusion fan and became a season ticket holder, a Fusionado. Really, got engaged on the pitch during a Fusion game. Really fell in love with that club. They went defunct. And there's, that's just, a couple of examples. You can look nationwide. There's so many clubs that have gone out of business. And I think in some ways for the local fan, there's a risk involved in supporting your local club. Yes, you want to support them so they can go on and survive and not go defunct. But the system as it's in place doesn't encourage local clubs to thrive. You mean because of the closed league system? So they'll never reach the pinnacle that, say, an MLS club has with the power and the money that they have. So in some ways, the safer bet for a lot of local fans is to support a club that's had a rich history overseas that's probably not going to go out of business.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. In fact, there's a lot of excitement now about USL's expansion. History tells us a lot of these clubs that are outside the MLS ecosystem, a lot of them go out of business. So the clubs might be doing well, and there are clubs that have done incredibly well attendance-wise and in terms of local marketing in year 1 or 2 that are in the lower divisions that go out of business. So I do understand that, and I've been through that. I've been through the same rigmarole as you with local clubs in South Florida. So I understand that and respect that point of view, but I also am addressing this largely to newer soccer fans who become Premier League fans or La Liga fans or whatever from watching Real Madrid and Barcelona or watching the Premier League on NBC, live in Boston or live in Omaha, Nebraska, or live in wherever and don't even know that there's local soccer, and then have some degree of contempt and say, well, those are Americans playing. They couldn't be very good, right? Or American coaches, whatever. Go check out a local game and you might enjoy it. And you might learn a lot about the sport and appreciate some of the struggles aspiring players and coaches go through a little more.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree completely. Jose Rodriguez says, I'm a Grimsby Town fan because of the playoff match where they got promoted to League 2. I did a lot of research and found out how big of a following they have for a lower league club. Prior to this, I had never heard of them. I purchased their iFollow streaming service too. Jason says, I like Man City because when I first started watching English football in the late 1990s, they were a third division team. I always liked the underdogs doing well, and I hated Man United. I also liked City's light blue kit, and I saw them in person in Baltimore a few years back. Still cheer for the underdog teams, such as when Leicester won the Premier League, and I always cheer for lower division teams in the cup competitions. But among the big teams in 2018, City is my favorite of the bunch.
Yeah, I can relate to that because those are some of the reasons why I stuck with City was being the third division. I remember going to watch the playoff match against the aforementioned Gillingham in 1999, and the light blue color and the fact that we weren't Man United, and it was kind of an underdog thing. It was always an underdog thing at that point, so I can definitely relate to that, and was obviously pleased when Leicester won the Premier League. Although now, I think in retrospect, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to say this for the first time publicly, Chris. I think in retrospect, what would have happened if Spurs had won the league instead? Maybe it would have made the league in general more competitive and more compelling down the road. The Leicester story was incredible. I'm glad they won the league, but I've just thought a little bit of revisionism recently. What if Spurs had actually won the league because they've been knocking on the door so much? That may have opened the league up more long term. Who knows?
Long term, yeah, I agree. Ken Mendonca says, just listen to the latest Will Soccer Talk podcast. I love Kartik's defense of local soccer. My Himashi FC will always be worth my support, and I won't stop telling those around me about a team they can be a part of. Ritik says, hi guys, thanks for reading my comment, and it was great to listen to the debate. I do sympathise with Kartik's views on the issue of La Liga matches abroad. Clubs should put local fans first, but nowadays they don't. Unfortunately, soccer has simply become a globalised sport, and it's inevitable that clubs will play matches abroad. While that hurts the European fans, the lifeblood of their clubs, it benefits us soccer fans in the States who want to see the best product that is La Liga, and I would gladly take the opportunity to watch a Valencia game in my area. I do agree that we should always support our local clubs that we have connections to first, and luckily for me, it's DC United. Joshua Miller says, I just listened to your podcast from last week about La Liga. Your section before the interview was the best bit I have heard from you guys since I started listening this summer, and it was great hearing some disagreement and discussion from you both. Personally, the analysis about TV channels and viewer numbers bores me to death. More talk about individual games and players would be much more interesting. I get tired of hearing how terrible MLS is and the different channels are, especially since I cut my cable and I do not keep track of MLS much. The only time I watch MLS is when it goes live on Twitter, and then the live chat feature makes up for the tremendously terrible announcers, although I will probably watch the MLS Cup this weekend. Are you going to do more talk about games and players in the future? I also like your comments on capitalism taking over soccer. Don't these people realize that developing love of the sport is much more effective and will ironically be will be even more profitable in the long run? I know that more kids that play soccer than any other sport, but when they grow up, they rarely keep playing or even become a soccer fan. The US is doing something wrong. Have a good week. Now, Joshua, just in terms of talking about players and kind of teams, we do from time to time. Definitely, we kind of talk sometimes more in depth about that. But the podcast really is more focused on the media business, and there's probably 100 different podcasts out there that talk about the players incessantly. But if something interesting pops up, we will certainly discuss it. And then Jason Ryder says, Kartik, hello there. I got a question for the podcast. Why do you think that Sheikh Mansour and his group decided to buy Man City out of all of the teams in the English league? Do you think back in 2008, if they had decided to buy a team like Fulham, Stoke or Reading instead, that they would be in the position that Man City is in now as the top team in the country?
There were two reasons, Jason. Thanks for the question. One was because Manchester is the second largest. Actually, in terms of population, the West Midlands area has the second largest population, but it's the second city in the sense of a lot of businesses. It is kind of the quote capital of the North, and it only had at that point one club that was very successful in Manchester United, and Manchester City had a rabid supporters base. That's part one. Part two is because it had a stadium paid for by the Manchester City Council, similar to the West Ham situation with Olympic Stadium, that was built for the Commonwealth Games, that was already built and paid for, that had been subsidized by taxpayers, which is a practice that I think all around the world we need to get away from, and we're beginning to get away from it here in the United States after the boondoggle of Marlins Park, where Chris and I recently visited. That really was the tipping point in this country. And I think in the UK, the tipping point is the West Ham situation. But that's why, because the council in Manchester had paid for that stadium for the Commonwealth Games. They had David Bernstein, who was the chairman of Manchester City, had been very instrumental in using his political influence to get that done, get it converted to a football stadium a year later. And Manchester City moved in 2003, a year after the Commonwealth Games. And that stadium was there. So I think that was the deciding factor. But I do think the temptation of going into Manchester was very, very important. Now, the other possibilities of clubs to buy would have been less likely than Fulham, Stoke, or Reading, would have been Newcastle, Everton, or Liverpool. And the decision, I think Manchester City ended up winning out over those clubs. Mike Ashley bought Newcastle just before Sheikh Mansour bought Manchester City. So keep that in mind also. So it could have been Newcastle potentially.
Wasn't it Roman Abramovich that was looking at Newcastle or Chelsea and then decided to go with Chelsea?
For Roman, yes, correct. And the reason, the legend behind that, Chris, is that he took a helicopter ride over Stamford Bridge and said, I like that better than St. James Park. I don't know if that's true, but that's the urban legend that's persisted now for 15 years.
Yep, that makes sense. All right, and then last item is from Anthony Bello. He says, "Hi guys, I would like to add some facts backing up my point on the MLS playoffs I made this past week. To date, MLS has played 49 knockout matches that weren't at neutral sites. Of those 49 matches, the home team has won 31 of those. That equals the home team winning 63% of the time. Also to date, MLS has played 74 two-legged series. Only 40 higher seeds have advanced to the next round. That equals 54% advancing. So if you take the percentages, one leg may be better for higher seeds. I know this may sound against conventional wisdom, but maybe if MLS wants to make the regular season more meaningful, the league may want to put an emphasis on home field advantage in the playoff because of those numbers." Those are interesting stats, Kartik. So it does show that, if MLS is going to, as proposed, move more to kind of single elimination knockout games rather than two-leg games during the playoff stages, that home field advantage is massive in these types of games.
Yeah, and this has been a complaint for a number of years. Jesse Marsh, who I mentioned at the top of the podcast, would have been perhaps my choice for the U.S. men's national team job. He probably would have been if I were conducting the search. He had complained a few years ago. Red Bulls kept winning the Supporters' Shield. They kept winning the Eastern Conference. And that basically it became very random and a crapshoot. He said, maybe I should finish sixth next year. Maybe I should just blow off the regular season. I think these are some of the reasons he wasn't considered for the U.S. job, by the way, Chris. He said, maybe I should blow off the regular season, finish sixth, and then have all the first legs at home. And then he also made comments about promotion and relegation, et cetera. Made him very unpopular with the top brass. So that's probably a big reason why he didn't get interviewed. But he had mentioned that basically every year with my Red Bull side, I'm forced to go away from home. We are the higher seed. We're either first or second in the East every single year. We saw it again this year with them, although he's left and got to Leipzig. And we lose because we lose that first leg. So I think Anthony's point is well taken. And the single elimination one-off matches, I guess, would put more emphasis on the regular season and having that match at home. Mm-hmm. But that's again for top seeds. Now, what's the pressure on for teams near the bottom of the table? That's the question, and that's never changed.
Right,
nothing.
Right, nothing. All right, guys. Well, we love getting your feedback, and we love getting your responses, advice, questions about advice, rants, raves, disagreements, agreements, you name it, and we love to read those out on air. So you can always reach us through email at worldsoccertalk.com, as well as facebook.com/worldsoccertalk, and on Twitter @worldsoccertalk. Plus, of course, you can always post your comments on the website worldsoccertalk.com. So, Kartik, it's a crazy end to the week. We've got a lot of big games coming up. We've got the MLS Cup final on Saturday. We've got the River-Boca Copa Libertadores second leg, hopefully, final on Sunday, as well as, of course, tons of league games. We've got Chelsea Man City this weekend too. Lots to look forward to, as well as the Premier League Fan Fest, and then next week we've got the Champions League coming back. So a lot of stuff to listen to, a lot of stuff to look forward to, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it next week. In the meantime, what should soccer fans do?
Enjoy your football.